looking at critically appraising a diagnostic study. So this is the clinical scenario. Good morning. Today we will be critically appraising a diagnostic study. This is the clinical scenario. We have a 28-year-old medical doctor who is currently primary gravid at 32 weeks of gestation. During a routine antenatal checkup, she was found to be having a BP of 140/90. She wants to know whether we can objectively predict the risk of her developing preeclampsia and other fetal and maternal outcomes. For that, I had picked the predictive value of SFLT by PLGF ratio in suspected preeclampsia in a New Zealand population, a prospective cohort study. So I will be using the CASP checklist. It has 3 sections. We are all aware of that. Section A is, are the results of the study valid? What are the results, and will the results help locally? So was there a clear question for the study to focus? Yes, the population they had included was singleton pregnancies between 20 and 36 plus 6 weeks of gestational age with suspected preeclampsia. The test was SFLT 1 by PLGF ratio. The kit they had used in the study is called Alexis. The control was the SOMANS and the prognosis criteria. SOMANS is basically Society of Obstetric Medicine in Australia and New Zealand criteria. They had defined what manifest preeclampsia is, suspect preeclampsia is. So it's a single center tertiary care hospital in New Zealand. The only exclusion criteria that they had was known fetal chromosomal or major congenital anomalies and inability to provide a consent, which kind of improves the generalizability because the inclusion criteria is like so narrow. So just to look at the biological basis behind the test. So the top left one is actually normal pregnancy. There is an increased blood flow because of vascular remodeling that happens at the junction of the uterus and the placenta. So VEGF and platelet derived growth factor are pro-angiogenic factors which help in increased blood circulation to the placenta. However, due to reasons unknown, one of the possible postulate is hypoxia causes increase of SFLT, which is soluble FMS like tyrosine kinase. That in turn reduces the VEGF and platelet placental growth factor. So essentially there is a mismatch between the angiogenic and the pro-angiogenic and the anti-angiogenic factors which determine the pathophysiology in preeclampsia. So when you have the SFLT going up, which is an anti-angiogenic one, and the PLGF coming down, which is the pro-angiogenic one, so there's all the manifestations of preeclampsia, hypertension, proteinuria, placental hypoxia, all things. So the outcomes that they had looked at is primary is to assess in pregnancies less than 35 weeks the value of SFLT by PLGF ratio of more than 38. The cutoff that they have taken is 38 to predict birth within 14 days. The secondary is to assess the association of the ratio measured before 37 weeks with adverse pregnancy outcomes. I'll just let you know what the adverse pregnancy outcomes subsequent slide. After the analysis, they had also looked at predictive value of this cutoff of more than 38 to rule out preeclampsia within 1 week and to rule it within the next 4 weeks from the baseline. The adverse outcomes that look at are preeclampsia, preterm birth, emergency cesarean section, need for MACSELF, small for gestational age, maternal hospital stay, pulmonary stroke, neonatal death. Timing this, they had recruited it from September 28 to December 2020 and followed till the last lady had delivered. So was there a comparison with an appropriate reference standard? So this is like I said, the SOMANS and the prognosis criteria. For the rest of the presentation, we will only take SOMANS because they have so many variables to look at in the study. So the manifest is what their primary, one of the outcomes is. New onset hypertension more than 140 or 90 or worsening of the pre-existing hypertension after 20 weeks and one of the organ involvement like renal, like proteinuria, hematological, they can have thrombocytopenia or TMA, liver dysfunction in the form of hepatitis, neurological involvement like seizures, altered behavior, pulmonary edema and fetal growth restriction as seen in Douglas. So did all the patients get the standard diagnostic test as a reference standard? All of them were included in the final, so all of them could have gotten both. However, there was no star flow diagram that was given. The different outcomes were compared with the test values at different time points. Essentially, each each of these patients were recruited anytime till the 38th week. So at the baseline, and from there every 1 to 4 weeks, depending on how often the obstetrician calls them, the sample was taken and frozen. And all of this were later analyzed only after the births. They did not have any say in how often will they call the patient. It was all decided by the obstetrician. So if you can see, the one of the outcomes is prediction of birth within 14 days and preeclampsia. So these two things were actually determined using the baseline SFLT value, but the rest of the outcomes were actually assessed based on the sample that was last drawn before 37 weeks. So different outcomes were compared against different test values, and these values were actually not mentioned in the text. So this is a star diagram that I had come. So the potentially eligible participants are 240, out of which 18 were excluded, 18 of which 8 of them did not have the test, 10 had baseline blood drawn after the 37 weeks. The eligible participants at the end of it was 2 to 2. So if you can look at in the text, they have written that 73 participants by the 37th week. However, if you look at it, all the final in the final outcomes, they've all put 74, which is different from the text and what they've been looking at. At the baseline, they had 64 positive. Again, there was no mention as to how many at what time were they becoming positive for the test, which is a cutoff of 38. And the last one is the ones who had normal one, which is 38. So there was a lot of missing data, making it difficult to create our own start figure. Firstly, they did not mention it, but there was no way we could have made an accurate one. Also, there was no supplementary data available for the same. Next, could the results of the test have been influenced by the results of the reference standard? The attending clinicians and the investigator at the time of collecting the pregnancy and birth information were all blind to the results that were going on till the study. Is the disease status of the tested population clearly described? So this is the baseline characters. The gestational age mean was 32. Most of them were this Maori tribe. So essentially so it is said that the Maori tribes have the highest incidence of preeclampsia across the world, with ranging up to 33 to 35. So the study was actually meant to validate this in the New Zealand population, and Maoris predominantly are in New Zealand, so they wanted to include the Maoris as much as possible. So they had 20% of them were there. The mean BMI was 30, nulliparous was 94. I just want to highlight one thing here. So although the inclusion criteria was suspected preeclampsia, they had also included 18% of them who did not have preeclampsia, which is a flaw in the way they had used. The next thing is, were the methods for performing the test described in sufficient detail? Methods for performing the test have been clearly defined in the study protocol. They had included details of preparation of serum, storage, method employed, internal and external quality control, and report units. However, what was not, so because it's a electrochemiluminescence test, you might probably need some expertise in how to interpret the test. Maybe the color change may be so fine that unless you are trained, you may not be picked up. So would any expertise be required? So were the people who were interpreting the test trained for it, or was just a absolute value that you would get? All those details were not mentioned in the study. So at the end of this first section are the results of the trial valid. It appears like the study had checked most of the boxes. Like there was a clear question, there was a comparison with standard reference. All of them were put through the diagnostic and reference test. However, there were quite a bit of flaws in the way it was done. Firstly, they had included population without the suspected preeclampsia, which is 18%. There was no start flow chart, lot of missing data, making it difficult. One thing I just forgot to highlight in the earlier slide is that the sample size, if you remember, I had actually put a red box around the secondary outcome and not the primary outcome. The sample size that they had calculated, although they had mentioned that the primary outcome was to assess birth within 14 days, the sample size that they had calculated was for the incidence of manifest eclampsia. So the sample size was actually calculated with secondary outcome and not primary outcome. So for the purpose of our appraisal, I will continue to take what they mentioned secondary outcome as our main outcome. It is unsure whether any expertise would be required for the interpretation of the report. It does not mention details of inter-observer, intra-observer reliability for the test. So having looked at all this, I think we will look at the studies for whatever it's worth. Yeah, so the section B is what are the results. So they wanted to achieve a sensitivity of 80, specificity of 85 and an estimated prevalence of 25. So the total sample size, so they had calculated the sample size to be 70 participants and with manifest preeclampsia and 20 without it. So that is 90. So 90 into, if the prevalence is 25, 90 into 4. So that's about 200 to 300 patients. They should have picked to assess, to be able to reach 70 and 20 at the end of it. So baseline characteristics are, so this is basically split between, now that we are looking at predominantly if a ratio of less than 38, or if the ratio of more than 38 will predict poorer outcomes for poorer outcomes. So three things that I want to highlight here is, one thing is nulliparous women. For each of these three things for different reasons. Nulliparous women actually, so the primigravidas have a higher incidence of preeclampsia. With every pregnancy, they are likely to have lesser preeclampsia. So if you look at it, so this is the one which is predicted to have a bad outcome. So there are more people here, 51% here. Second thing is smoking. Smoking across studies have shown that it's actually beneficial in the pathogenesis of preeclampsia. So the ones which are likely to do better actually have like bigger number. Chronic hypertension I want to highlight in the background of incidence in India actually. The chronic hypertension here although it's 23% and 50, in India it's about less than 5%, very different from what it is here. So if you have to look at the results, the main result is the manifest preeclampsia, where if the SFLT by PIGF ratio is more than 38, there is a 73% of them in that group had developed manifest preeclampsia during the course. The odds ratio is 17, which is like you're 17 times more likely to have manifest preeclampsia if your SFLT by PIGF ratio is more than 38 as opposed to the ones who have it less than 38. The other two outcomes that I want to register is total emergency section, out of which 60% of them who had that ratio had to be taken up for a total emergency LSES, and severe preterm is about 17% of them had preterm babies born at the end of it. So next thing is to look at the sensitivity and specificity. Like I said earlier, we will continue to stick to only Soman's criteria for ease of it. So the sensitivity was 85% with a confidence interval of 73.8 and 93.6 and a specificity of 84 to 94. I'll just expand on. So this is the 2x2 table that we've made from the data that we have. So of the ones, so 48 of them were both test positive and they also had the disease, which is the manifest preeclampsia. 16 of them were test positive but did not actually develop a manifest preeclampsia. 8 of them had test negative but did have manifest preeclampsia, and 150 were negative for both. So like we all know, sensitivity is true positive by true positive false negative, and based on that if you apply these three, so these were the ones that had come. So in fact it is exactly similar to what they had mentioned in the chart. So actually the numbers were reproducible from whatever was given in the study. So next thing is the likelihood ratios. They did not mention likelihood ratios, but with this we can calculate. So the positive is probability that test is positive in disease by the probability that test is positive in non-diseased ones, or you can say sensitivity by 1 minus specificity. So sensitivity was, so I had taken, I did not take into consideration the confidence interval, I had taken the single value, 85.7 by 100 minus 90, which is 8.9. So if you were to interpret it, let's say if I am just taking the pretest probability of for our lady is 60 and with a positive likelihood ratio. So this is the Fagan's nomogram. So if you draw a line across, so this is 8.9. So from 60, which was a pretest possibility, the post-test probability will go up to 92. The negative likelihood ratio is 100 minus 85.7 by 90.1, which is 0.16. So from 60, if you were to use negative likelihood ratio, it will become somewhere about 80. So how sure are we about the results, consequences and costs of the alternatives? The sensitivity, like I had mentioned, is 85. The confidence intervals are pretty wide, like 74 to 94. However, the specificity is 90. The confidence is much less wider than the sensitivity. What are the consequences of the alternatives? False positive was 9.6%. So that is patients without a test had a positive test. So what are the likely consequences? Patient anxiety and probably early unwanted intervention. False negatives are 8 in 64 patients with disease had a test negative, which is risk of preeclampsia could be underestimated. So last section, will the results help locally? Consider whether you are primarily interested in the impact on a population or at an individual level. So for that, can the results be applied to your patients or population of interest? The prevalence in India is actually much less than what was taken study, which is 5 to 15%. There are, like I said in the baseline characters, there are 3 things I want to highlight, which is smoking. 80% of them were actually smokers, which is much less in India. The incidence of chronic hypertension there was about 15%, which is about less than 5% here. But none of these factors on the right side should affect the performance of the test per se. So I just want to highlight the prevalence alone. So if you look at this, here this is what our study is showing. So with the 25% prevalence, the positive predictive value is 74 and the negative predictive value is 95. If you have to extrapolate it in an Indian population, let's assume that the prevalence is 5. The positive predictive value is significantly come down and the negative predictive value has 99. So can we really use it in India as a question? So can the test be applied to your patient or population of interest? The patient profile is the same as in CMC. Given that we have a good lab and we have we have ELISAs for a lot of other tests, it may not be very difficult to perform the test in CMC. So the turnaround time is less than a day. This is just to show the DNA labs in India and the Metropolis lab, both of them offer the testing in India and it is quite widely done in other centers. The cost is roughly about 6,000 and 3,600 depending on where you are doing it. But at a community level, will the clinical acumen decline if this is made part of the existing standard of care? Could this potentially lead to inequality in the care of poor population who cannot afford it? That also needs to be considered. So actually we also have Indian data from Lucknow, so they had also looked at it and it was pretty similar results. Were all outcomes important to the individual or population considered? Yes. The test had a good sensitivity and specificity. The specificity was higher than the sensitivity. In the current clinical practice, given that pregnancy is anyways a vulnerable condition, patients are closely monitored. However, given the good specificity and a positive likelihood ratio, it is likely to aid in this stratification. So all those with a positive test can be given the benefit of being monitored vigorously. If we have limited resources, we could maybe direct them to those who have positive tests. But would that really translate to better maternal fetal outcomes? We cannot tell it from here. So what would be the impact of using this test on your patients? Based on this one study alone, we cannot decide. So if I were to look at it, then I would design a pragmatic RCT to assess clinical and outcomes. So I would include all patients suspected preeclampsia and randomize them into the ones who get the test and who do not get the test. And then the ones who get the test will have to have result-directed management. Who don't have will be existent protocols, and then look at the maternal fetal outcomes along with cost analysis. This would be the most ideal way to answer to that question. However, blinding is not feasible because the outcomes that we are looking at is birth, when to decide on delivery, how long the child is going to be in the ICU, how long the mother is going to be in the ICU. And objective very subjective, depends on the doctor when he is likely to discharge the baby or the baby. And there is no absence of standard protocol, like in our own hospital, each unit may follow different protocols. So this may not be, although this is most ideal, this may not be very feasible. it can be used as an adjunct to the existing protocols. So given that this ideal study design may not be feasible or is very difficult, do we have any other evidence to answer our existing question? So for that, I just want to do 2-3 slides on this other systematic review. So this is the placental growth factor based biomarker testing to help diagnose preeclampsia in people with suspected preeclampsia. It's a health technology assessment. I picked 2 charts. One thing is the Alexis. This is a test that we were doing for this study. Here, if you can see, the sensitivity was 95. So I just want you to look at just this one thing, because this is what we were looking at. In our study they had all this, but for the ease, we'll just look at one value, which is at 4 weeks. At 4 weeks, the specificity was 96. In our study, it was 90. And sensitivity was 64. In our study, it was 83. In fact, our study. So this is the meta-analysis systematic review of 13 trials, of which one of which our trial is also a part of. The other thing that I want to highlight is this Gram-Scriptor one. So this is the technique based on which the Indian tests are performed on. So here, so within 4 weeks is what we'll take. They had a specificity of 92 and a sensitivity of 64, which is closer to what we had seen. So this study also had another part which had looked at the cost effectiveness. So of the after 13 studies, they had figured out that the effectiveness of the placental growth factor based biomarker testing as an adjunct to the standard clinical assessment versus standard clinical assessment alone for the prediction of preeclampsia in people with suspected preeclampsia. They had found that the testing resulted in cost savings compared to the standard clinical assessment alone. So clinical case resolution. So we had a 28-year-old medical officer, primary gravid at 32 weeks, who had a high blood pressure on routine visit. She wanted to know whether there is a way to objectively know the risk of this. So for this lady, given that cost is not an issue, given that she is likely to understand the risk and the benefit, I would offer the testing as an adjunct to the current ongoing protocols.